I love watching old-timey movies. The many historical inaccuracies are always good for a laugh, but sometimes they go too far. In the 1993 film Gettysburg, the true star of the film was not Tom Berenger's beard, Stephen Lang, Martin Sheen, Jeff Daniels, or Sam Elliott. The real star was Offensive Death. Instead of giving us a Clint Eastwood offenses, we got stuck with a Steve Urkel.
Did I do that?
I've always wanted to know what a 19th century post and rail fence looked and felt like. And the only way to find out was to build my own. Hopefully this fence will be strong enough to hold back a 9-year-old neighbor kid who's really making me feel old. The early 2000s is not classic TV. When I started this project, I would hew out fence posts out of complete logs. There were small logs, and you really only had to hew out 2 sides. Relatively easy work. Incidentally, for anybody who's interested in learning how to hew timbers, fence posts is a good place to start, after you've initially split a few dozen cords of firewood, that is. I'd dress up the fence post with my goose wing axe from time to time, square it up. If I wanted a real fine finish, I could just go over it with my foot adze. Since I want to make these commercially available, I decided to try something to save a bit of time. I had my Amish sawyer friend go ahead and cut me out some slabs of white oak. I had him cut them out 5 inches thick, so I can take out up to about ½ an inch on each side, and it would still work well. I went down the length of the fence post and cut scoring marks for the foot adze. My goal is to make all the saw marks disappear and make it a hewn timber. Initially, I thought maybe it would save a lot of time, but actually, it didn't save me any time at all. And after I use up these posts, I'm going right back to using complete logs. It's easier to take an entire log and lop off 2 sides than it is to go over every square inch of the log with a foot adze. But they do look good when you're finished. At this point I had to tackle the mortises. I ordered a brand new Bosch drill that after 3 or 4 holes, it broke. It was a total disappointment. I got on Facebook Marketplace and I looked for a drill that I knew would be able to handle this. When I was a kid working at the sawmill building crane mats, this drill was a holy terror, and I was always afraid that it would rip my arms right off. But I was pleasantly surprised, and it went right through these white oak posts without any issues whatsoever. Just to silence the inevitable critic I'll see here on YouTube, I decided to try to cut out the rest of the mortise with a chainsaw. It worked okay, but it didn't give me quite the results that I was looking for. Taking my mortise axe, I went ahead and just chopped out between each hole. This would have been much easier if I had done this the right way. Now strip the bark, and I'm ready to tackle those fence rails. When it comes to splitting fence rails, you really have two options. The most cost-effective and easiest is simply to take straight tree branches and split them in half. In a matter of less than 2 or 3 minutes, you have two serviceable fence rails. The other method is more time consuming, but it gives you a nicer looking rail. For this, you need big logs. I start by splitting the log right down the center. This is the hardest split to make. This one has a very nice grain to it. Once the log's in half, I split it down into quarters. The smaller the individual pieces get, the easier it is to split it. After the log is quartered, I split it into eighths. In this case, each eighth is going to make 3 fence rails. I split the inside rail first, and it turns out beautifully. Once I put this fence up, you should see the difference between rails made out of tree branches and rails made out of logs. Now I need to taper the ends of the rails so they'll slide into the mortises. I tried doing it with the foot adze, the axe and the foot adze. For this, I really do need to make up a set of dogs to hold the rail in place while I'm carving on the ends. With the rails tapered, I can start putting up the fence. I dig the post hole. I go about 2 foot 6 inches deep and drop the very first post in the ground. I backfill and tamp as I go, make it as sturdy and as level as I possibly can. I drop the next post into its hole, but before I backfill, I go ahead and slide the rails in place. With this type of fence, it's definitely easiest to put the rails in as you assemble the fence. These rails are incredibly heavy. With all the rails in place, I measure it real quick. I'm aiming for 10-foot centers. Perfect. I can go ahead and finish up the second post and keep right on going on. This fence is definitely more robust than a commercially available so-called split rail fence. After building this fence, I can now understand how a post and rail fence was a real military barrier in the 19th century. It would be incredibly difficult to take it apart. Sturdy, stable, and I can actually see how difficult it would have been to go over this fence. My favorite part of this fence is the fact that when the ends rot off, I can take the rails and cut them into firewood. That's something you just can't do with pressure-treated split rail fences today. Make sure you stick around because I'm going to revisit this subject in the future, and I'm going to show you some of the screw-ups I made on this particular fence. But for now, I have some shingles to get out to Indiana.